when when the news that Selma was being released, myself, Dr. Edson Burton, and Watershed senior curator and programmer Maddie and Mark, respectively, we thought we wanted to do more than just let the film go by without a chance for public discussion and so on, because it has such a strong resonance for Bristol and for the world generally, especially in this year of civil rights anniversaries. Malcolm X's biography, 50 years since publication, Race Relations Act, amongst other things. And so with that in mind, myself, Maddie, Madge Dresser and others have come together to provide a series of introductions. And it was with great pleasure that Anthony Reddie, who, as you can see, is a tutor at Bristol Baptist College, agreed to give some representation to the film. Anthony's also the author of Is God Colorblind? Now, for many people today, I guess, Christianity is not in vogue, and so many of us sort of think about what the relevance of that is to this film and to the discussion generally. But I think actually it's a great chance for Anthony to think about social engagement and faith, and to see that actually, if you're of the left or of any political persuasion, the relevance of theology and theological thinking today. Anthony's a personal friend, someone whose opinion and thoughts generally I value immensely, and I'm quite happy to pass on to him to share his thoughts on the film with you. Thank you.
It's always somewhat strange and gratifying when people clap you before you've even got up and said anything yet so far. I hope that my brief comments will indeed be worthy of your applause. Obviously, if not, then I'll make a quick run for it, and I'll see how it goes. A number of years ago, I think it's in the early 90s, there was a biography of Martin Luther King that was written by his close friend and confidant, the Reverend Ralph D. Abernathy. And the biography created a lot of stir because Abernathy, perhaps really for the first time, began to peel back the layers of hagiography, the layers of almost sainthood that had accreted, I guess, over the years around the legend and the myth of Martin Luther King. That actually what had happened actually since his death in 1968 is that the legend and the myth had grown and the flesh and blood human being had sort of descended into the background. So when Abernathy published his book that began to tell the truth about King in a more rounded way, the initial reaction was one of anger and disappointment. That I remember being part of a community meeting at the time in Birmingham in the early 90s. And the initial reaction was, why is Abernathy trying to do a hatchet job on Martin Luther King? It was the first time it came out that he was a womanizer. First time it came out that he drank and that he smoked. It's very interesting that, I don't want to do a spoiler, but it's very interesting that in the film we see King smoking a cigarette. King was a smoker, but there was a careful type of PR management around, I think, a certain politics of respectability that was about trying to show King in a way to show the best of him to the world in order to vindicate the movement. That was essential for African Americans at that time to show themselves to be almost a blameless community in order to argue for the rights to be human beings and to have the rights that perhaps most other Americans, most white Americans actually took for granted. And so when Abernathy published his book, it was perhaps the first time there was a crack in the carefully concealed image and the mythology that had grown up. In some respects, what the film does, as you will see for yourself in a moment, is that it begins to show a number of crucial things about the civil rights movement. Firstly, about Martin Luther King, he was a flesh and blood human being. In actual fact, his greatness is not diminished by the flaws, it makes him all the more heroic. Because you see, so long as someone remains at the level of myth, the level of somehow being superhuman, it separates them from us. It says that somehow in order to be a person of commitment and courage, you somehow need to be somehow more human, superhuman. But the truth is, all of us, even the greats, have feet stuck in clay. That it is his genius that despite the flaws and despite the weaknesses, despite his succumbing to temptation, he still remains a great human being. And his greatness is elevated because of his weakness, because all of us are weak. All of us are flesh and blood. All of us struggle between that sense of what we would like ourselves to be and the reality of where we are. And so the film gives a rounded portrayal. It shows the cracks in the marriage. It shows the strain that was placed upon him as he led the movement in a very sacrificial sense. He lived in a modest house. He didn't have any great savings to his name when he died. His greatness is not diminished by his weaknesses. It elevates him. But I think also in the film, perhaps of even greater importance, it shows that this was a movement not built just on the mythology or the courage of one man, although indeed great courage at that. It's actually built on the sacrifice of ordinary human beings. That the success of the movement was to galvanize ordinary people and to make them believe that they themselves can make a difference. And it seems to me that part of the importance of this film as we approach a general election in less than 100 days' time, as we have been told ad nauseum, is the belief that we matter, that all of us matter, that the strength of democracies rests on the belief that no matter how insignificant we may feel ourselves to be, that our presence makes a difference. Without us, the whole doesn't function. The mass participation of the civil rights movement, as you will see in the film, is more than just one great individual. It's actually lots of people believing in a dream, believing in a hope that some of them did not live to see, but still pursued that hope nonetheless. It is indeed, for me, a great inspiration. I saw the film earlier today and was struck by how many ordinary people were captivated by the power of an idea. As a Christian theologian, you would expect me to say this, but it's very interesting that the thing that often gets downplayed in our looking at the civil rights movement now, over 40 years on, is to see it purely as a social and political movement. It was that, but it was also a faith-based movement. And it seems to me that one of the greatest legacies of King is that he is a reminder of what the best of religious inspired social activism can be. That, like, we know what the worst is, and certainly as someone who has spent a lot of time in my own work looking at the effects of empire, looking at the effects of colonialism, looking at the effects of slavery, and the way in which the Christian faith colluded with that. And there's certainly within the scriptures, within the Christian scriptures, there is sadly too much about violence and too much about oppression of the weak and the marginalized. But what Martin Luther King, what Selma shows us, is that at its best there is the power of the belief of hope, the power of the belief of an egalitarian spirit where all of us matter, where it's not just the great and the good that make decisions, but it's the will of ordinary people that actually gives legitimacy to democracy, to the people who rule us. I guess my final words are ones that come from a conference I heard a number of years ago, and the speaker said this, and I've never forgotten it, and so I will share it with you. It's not my words, it's words that come from Sir Michael Checkland, believe it or not, former boss of the BBC, who many years ago at the Methodist conference, I'm a Methodist, although I work in a Baptist college. Schizophrenic, I know, but hey. But actually, Sir Michael Checkland said this. He says, if you think you're too small to make a difference, then you've never shared a bed with a mosquito. Hold that image in mind, that actually the key sense of perseverance that came from the civil rights movement was that sense of being that irritant, that mosquito that just pricked away at the body of injustice, refusing to go away, refusing to be ignored, that eventually brought about change. I'm sure that the film will inspire you, but not just as a historical event, but hopefully will inspire us to believe that there are still movements that we need to create, mass movements to fight injustice in our present context. And when we come to vote, whichever party you vote for, that we do so not on the basis of self-interest, not on the basis of the preferential option for the middle class, but we do so on the basis of being those irritants that are challenging injustice and want to crush those who are seen to be insignificant at the bottom or on the margins of society. Enjoy the film. Thank you.